certain groups have been able to establish what the status quo is, who is normal by default.
Deconstructing racism as a woman is doubly important. We must view
to change these things, we really are going to have to do some serious restructuring, and that restructuring isn't just outside of ourselves, it's also within ourselves.
Welcome to Essential Stories, an independent grassroots docuseries and live roundtable discussions that give voice to people on the front lines of our world's most pressing social issues.
According to historian Louis Hank, it was Aristotle who first wrote that all women, as well as children, slaves, servants, animals, were to be the property of male heads of patriarchal households. Native men were considered less masculine according to the male-centric European standard, which placed women beneath men and held them to be property of men, along with said children, servants, slaves, animals, and all of nature. Tonight's topic is, what is the relationship between patriarchy and racism?
First of all, you have to go back to, I think it was 1910. Susan B. Anthony and the suffragettes were agitating for women to vote. And as part of this, they invited Ida B. Wells to also have a march of colored women that would join up the march that the white women were having. Literally hours before this march was about to happen, the white male legislators who were being petitioned by this march to support their women's right to vote said, you have to not let the Black Women's March join the White Women's March, because that is going to offend a lot of powerful white men who will then not support women's voting rights. And of course, the white women relented. They said, you can have a march, Black women, but you cannot join our march. You cannot join the main march. You can have a separate march off to the side that can ask for the same thing, but it will not be a part of the main march. It's the kind of visual that illustrates where this country's history and this country of women's emancipation in this country, how soiled it is at the roots, how rarely these incidents are recounted. There have been so many movies about the suffragettes recently. None of them are going to bring this up. But I think that is a good illustration of how I conceive of the relationship between racism and patriarchy.
If patriarchy isn't the, foundation on which racism was built, it's definitely close. It's a very important aspect of it, because if you boil down the definition of patriarchy to its simplest form, it's this father figure-like view of things. And because that's the view of things, it's marginalized a lot of people, including women, including people of color. And as a clinician, as a mental health professional, I've really been thinking about how it relates to mental health care, utilization of services, trauma, generational trauma, and patriarchy flows throughout all of those.
I started by looking up the definition of patriarchy, which according to Merriam-Webster is a social organization marked by the supremacy of the father in the clan or family, the legal dependence of wives and children, and the reckoning of descent and inheritance in the male line, broadly controlled by men of a disproportionately large share of power. Because our society and our social systems were created along the lines of patriarchy, certain groups have been able to establish what the status quo is, who is normal by default, who has certain rights by default, who is classified as property, who can own property. Basically, all social movement is established by the patriarchy. So that means that generally speaking, in the history of this country, the power has been held by white males who have been able to enhance and distribute information about certain groups that is incorrect and has been proven to be incorrect, such as popular pseudosciences, stereotypes that are just shared on the day-to-day. And these sorts of activities have deeply affected who we are, all of us, whether you're a white male, a Black woman, a child, because we learn who we are from each other and what we believe as a society is normal. These ideas that we've been hearing for generations are ingrained deeply within us, and they affect how we feel about ourselves to this day. Though we may not be hearing explicitly racist messages, though we may not be hearing explicitly sexist messages, there are still feelings and ideas that are perpetuated through the generations of our families that make us feel a certain way about ourselves and believe a certain way about our capabilities and the movement and possibilities we have for ourselves in this world.
If we want to talk about racism and patriarchy, we need to realize that racism and patriarchy are not two separate institutions that intersect only in the lives of Black women or people of color. They are two interrelated, mutually supporting systems of domination, and their relationship is essential to understanding the subordination of women. And racism makes the experience of sexism different for Black women than white women, period. And deconstructing racism as a woman is doubly important. We must view our privilege as white women to open the doors and move out of the way and turn over the microphone or the stage or the leadership to women of color so that we can understand what it has been like for the last 400 years, because we did not experience that. The patriarchy is held in place by existing power structure and the resource distribution and identity divisions that maintain that structure. And it is under the premise that there is scarcity of resource and that we must compete against other people, other identity groups, to have access to the limited availability of those resources and wealth. And while the 1%, primarily white men, concentrate more and more wealth, our Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color incomes continue to shrink, stagnate, or decline over the past many decades. And women maintain the same level of disparity in income and across race, across access to income. We see not only the racial disparities, but add on top of that the sexism and the sex disparity.
If you look at the structure of everything, and if you look at the problems we have in the world, from climate change to sexism to you name it, you can take it back to white supremacy and patriarchy, which is this fundamental belief that white men are entitled and have all the answers and are the ones who should be doing whatever they want and can take whatever they want regardless. That is the underpinning of our society. So to change these things, we really are going to have to do some serious restructuring, and that restructuring isn't just outside of ourselves, it's also within ourselves, because we have been raised in this society and the ways in which it permeates are so profound and so subtle often that unless we're paying really close attention, we don't even notice.
In this conversation, I ask us all to examine how we participate in the existing power structure and how it might be possible to reimagine it. We will never be rid of one institution, patriarchy, without destroying the other, racism, and vice versa.